Before we attach the neckline facing, we will have to get the center front of the neckline facing. We do this by first aligning the shoulder seams together, and then we fold gently the facing until we get the center. Actually, there's also a mark on the center. Then we will cut a little snip to show where the center of the neckline facing is. Now you can see the snip. And we have also a snip on the main bodice to determine or show where the center front of the main bodice is of the neckline. Now, we will be attaching the neckline facing. So first, we will be folding the zipper allowance facing the right side of the fabric. Then, we will be opening flat the shoulder allowances. And again, we will be folding the zipper allowance with the right side of the fabric facing each other. So, we have the center front of the bodice, and we will also pin the center front of the neckline facing. We pin on the wrong side of the fabric or the garment, and we pin on the sewing lines. Then we will first pin the shoulder seam of the facing and that of the main bodice. We will align the sewing lines together. And again, we will pin on the sewing lines of both the neckline facing and the main bodice. The head of the pin on the center front should actually be facing this way. And again, we will be pinning the seam of the shoulder line of both the main bodice and the facing. We pin on the sewing lines. We first align the seam of the main bodice and the neckline facing. Now that the bigger areas have been pinned, we will be pinning the sewing lines of the inner portion of the bodice and the facing. We pin on the sewing lines of both the facing and the bodice. Now we're pinning the sewing lines of both the back bodice and the neckline facing. And we will be pinning the other side of the back bodice and the neckline facing. As I said, we have to pin the sewing lines of both the back bodice and the neckline facing. On the facing, we can see that there's an excess fabric. We can just cut this out. Now we will start sewing together the facing and the main bodice. Again, for the start of our sewing together the facing and the bodice. Okay, since this is a curved area of the garment, we have to be slow in sewing this together. Okay, as you can see, the sewer is making sure that the fabric is lying flat on the machine. Otherwise, the fabric may be folded in such a way that we will have to rip the stitches and sew it again. Okay, again we have to lock stitch the end. Now that we have sewn together the facing to the main bodice, we will have to cut the excess sewing allowance. We just leave 1/4 of an inch or 0.6 of a centimeter. Now that we have sewn the facing and the main bodies together and we have cut the sewing allowances to 1/4 of an inch or 0.6 of a centimeter, since this is a curved part of the garment, we will have to cut slashes here. We have to cut or slash the sewing allowances 5/8 of an inch apart or 1.5 centimeters apart. Here, where there is a thicker fabric because of the shoulder allowances on both the main bodies and the facing, we have to make the slash nearer each other so that when we lay flat the fabric, the neckline curve can easily be followed. Just make sure that you're not hurrying and that your slash doesn't hit the stitches that have joined the main bodies to the neckline facing. Now that we have completed the slashing process, we will have to stay stitch the sewing allowances on the facing. We just have to make sure that the stitches are sewing together the sewing allowances on the facing. Again, we lock stitch the start of our sewing. And since this is a curved part of our garment, we have to make sure that we're sewing this garment flat. And we're really following the curve of the neckline. We sew down the sewing allowances so that this will not appear bulky when we attach the neckline to the main bodice. Now that we have attached the sewing allowances on the neckline facing, we will fold out by pressing the facing this way. We fold out the zipper allowance this way. Okay? Here. Okay, now we will also do the same on the other side. We fold out the zipper allowance this way. And the facing will be inside the zipper allowance. Now we will pin base the facing on the main bodice so that this will be flat on the main bodice. As you can see, she pin basted first the center front, the shoulder lines, where the zipper allowance is, and then she started pin basting the inner part of the garment. Now that we have pin basted the facing on the main bodice on the neckline area, we will be hand basting this. Okay? It is best that your left hand, that the fingers of your left hand are under the facing so that you can feel if the facing is is flat on the surface of the main bodice. As you can see, while she is hand basting, she's also removing the pin. This way, the pin does not become an obstruction by getting caught by the thread. Also, it is best that the thread is not too long. Otherwise, you might end up having to unravel the knot the long thread has created. Of course, since this is double threaded and we just use the single thread, make sure that this part is there's a big distance between the tail end of the thread from the main thread. To reinforce your stitch, just make a back stitch at the end of or double the back stitch at the end of your hand basting. At the start of the basting, the thread was knotted. Now we have finished connecting the neckline facing on the main garment, and we have also hand basted it.